a human error. That's the most typical conclusion you'll find in accident reports. The operator made a mistake, the supervisor failed to intervene, the worker broke the rule. Case closed. What's the problem then? That is often where accident investigation ends, as it should be the point where it begins. Today we are looking at a paper by Washington Barbosa that asks a simple but important question. What if human error is not the cause of the accident? What if it's merely the final symptom? That's today's topic. Stay tuned. Greetings and welcome to Safety Doctor. Today we are talking a bit about science. Often on this channel we talk about real life accidents, real organizations and real safety problems. But every now and then it's useful to take a look what the research says. Not because research would replace experience, but because good research helps us understand why the same problems keep appearing in the real world. Today's paper is called Training in the Prevention of Major Accidents Through the Proactive Safety Approach. And while reading it, one question kept coming to my mind. If safety science has been teaching these ideas for decades, why are they still so relevant today? So what is Dr. Barbosa really saying? At its core, Barbosa's message is remarkably simple. Major accidents rarely happen because one person makes one mistake. When something goes wrong, we normally and naturally focus on the individual closest to the event. Maybe we can call him the usual suspect. Who made the decision, who violated procedures, and who should have known better. These questions matter, but they are rarely enough. Major accidents are usually the results of interactions between people, equipment, procedures, leadership decisions, organizational priorities, and operational pressures. This paper describes organizations as socio-technical systems. This sounds quite academic, but the idea is quite straightforward. Everything is connected. Leadership influences priorities, priorities influence resources, resources influence maintenance, staffing and training. And all these things influence risk. By the time an accident occurs, the conditions behind it may have been developing for a very long time. The accident is often the final visible outcome, not the beginning of the story. Is this a new idea? The honest answer would be no, not really. Researchers have been discussing these ideas for decades. People like James Reason, Jens Rasmussen, Sidney Dekker and Erik Holnagel have all explored how accidents emerge from systems rather than isolated human failures. Human actions matter. Of course they matter, but they rarely tell the whole story. So if these ideas are not new, why does this paper matter? Because despite of decades of research, many organizations still investigate accidents as though these ideas never existed. And that's where I think Barbosa's contribution becomes valuable. The paper is not trying to reinvent safety sciences. It's trying to make safety science usable. There is a gap between knowing and doing. In my opinion, this is the most important part of the paper. Not the theory, the application. Let's be honest, most organizations don't have a theory problem. They have an execution problem. We know that warning signs appear before a disaster. We know that safety barriers deteriorate over time. We know organizational pressures influence decisions. And we know risks can become normalized. None of this is a mystery. Yet major accidents continue to happen. Why? Because understanding an idea is not the same thing as applying it. In my work, I have never met an organization that knew nothing about safety. Many organizations spend enormous effort measuring the outcomes, injuries, accident rates, lost time incidents, but far less effort measuring the health of the system itself. Are the safety barriers working? Are known deficiencies being corrected? Are inspections effective? Are people actually learning? These are much harder questions. And that, in my opinion, is exactly why Barbosa's paper remains relevant. As I was reading the paper, one thought kept returning to my mind. Systems do not create themselves. Leaders create systems. Every organization reflects a series of decisions. Decisions about resources, decisions about priorities, decisions about what gets measured, and sometimes decisions about what gets ignored. Maintenance programs do not prioritize themselves. Inspection systems do not organize themselves. Resources do not allocate themselves. People make these decisions. And those decisions shape the environment in which everybody works. Leaders often say safety is a priority, but systems reveal that that is not where the real priorities lay. This is why I do not see major accident prevention primarily as a safety department responsibility. I see it as a leadership responsibility. Safety professionals can identify risks, they can provide advice, they can raise concerns, but leadership ultimately decides how the organization responds. And that leads me to a quite controversial opinion. Any safety department's most important goal should be to make itself obsolete. Not because safety becomes less important, quite the opposite, because safety has to become so deeply integrated into leadership, operations, maintenance, and everyday decision making that it is no longer owned by a single department. When that happens, safety stops being a function and it becomes a part of how the organization operates. Accountability still matters. Before we go any further, I want to make one thing clear. When we talk about systems, organizational factors and leadership decisions, that does not mean that individual responsibility disappears. I don't believe in that. Workers make decisions, supervisors make decisions, managers make decisions, directors make decisions, and those decisions matter. If somebody knowingly ignores a safety rule or breaks the law, that decision has to have consequences. The problem is not that we talk too much about individual responsibility. The problem is that many investigations stop there. Understanding the system does not remove accountability. It helps us understand why the decisions made sense at the time, and more importantly, how similar decisions could be prevented in the future. In my view, blaming individuals is rarely, if ever, productive, but removing all individual responsibility is not very productive either. Good safety requires both accountability and understanding. Lessons learned today. Human error should never be where the investigation stops. Organizations rarely fail because they ignore risks. More often they fail because they learn to live with them. The ultimate goal of safety department should be to make itself obsolete. Not because safety becomes less important, but because safety becomes everyone's responsibility. The best accident investigation begins before the accident even happens. The goal is not simply to explain failure. The goal is to recognize weak signals early enough to prevent failure from happening at all. what would I challenge? Before I conclude, there's one point where I would challenge the paper. The paper focuses heavily on training, and training is important. People cannot apply concepts they do not understand. But training alone does not prevent major accidents. In fact, one thing I have learned over the years is that training is not a miracle cure that fixes everything. And if someone claims it is, you should immediately become skeptical, because that is snake oil. Organizations can provide excellent training while continuing to tolerate known deficiencies. They can teach systems thinking while rewarding short-term production goals over long-term risk reduction. Knowledge matters, but leadership matters too. Resources matter, priorities matter, and perhaps most importantly, action matters. Training can help people recognize problems, but leadership determines whether the problems are actually fixed. And this is why I see Barbosa's framework as an important part of major accident prevention, but not a complete solution on its own. So what do I think about Barbosa's paper? I do not see it as a revolutionary new theory. I see it as a practical framework for teaching ideas that safety science has been developing over decades. And perhaps that is exactly what many organizations need, because the biggest challenge today is not the lack of knowledge, it's applying what we already know. And that is why research still matters. Not because it would give us magical new answers, but because it helps us see familiar problems more clearly. And that is exactly what Barbosa's paper does. That was everything I have for you today. If you find the content valuable, please leave a comment, subscribe and like. That will help me greatly. If your organization struggles with any of the topics on my channel, don't hesitate to contact me. I can help you. The link to the paper discussed in this episode can be found in the comments. I am Safety Doctor. See you in next episode.